Welcome to the Level Up Artist podcast. We're your host, Adriana May, and
Yaki Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we are very excited to have a workshop facilitator and fellow creative, Greg Whitt. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, we're so excited to have you on the podcast today. We're looking forward to discussing your journey, philosophy, and transformative impact on programs in our community. But real quick, before we dive in, let's go ahead and share a little bit about your background for our listeners who may not be familiar with you or the work that you've done.
Absolutely. Real quick about Greg, artist, educator, founder of Drum for Change. Greg's work focuses on creatively connecting people through interactive workshops, retreats, and participatory keynotes designed to foster communication, cooperation, and collaboration. With a background in holistic lifestyle practices, Greg's mission is to reconnect people with one another and the world around them in meaningful ways. And in this episode, we're going to be diving into the journey and, basically all the good stuff of how you got to where you are now. But before we do so, Greg, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a nice coverage there. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Now, Greg, when did you start playing drums? We'll dive right in.
I've always been musical, right? I came from a fairly musical family. My dad was in the high school band, and he was actually a DJ when I was growing up, and sold his electric guitar and his '65 Mustang to get a crib and a family wagon. So I kind of wish he hadn't done that part, but anyway, it was all good. My mom was the bookkeeper for a hi-fi store, and so we always had a great stereo at home and a good vinyl collection. So music was always a big part of my life, and I did the high school band, from sixth grade on, and played in the jazz ensemble, and the cuter girls were over in the chorus, so I joined the choral ensembles, and then the musical theater, and then I went off to college, and in college I thought I was going to be an engineer, and I actually had a scholarship in aerospace engineering, a 4-year full ride, and I took it over to NC State, and there I met calculus, and so my
Uh-oh.
engineering
Yep.
career was a short-lived romance, and wound up with a degree in communication instead. And so through all of those, trials and tribulations of college and the undergraduate degree, I wound up in the Air Force of all places. And so I spent 8 years in the Air Force and then came back to NC State to finish the degree in communications that I had started way back when. And there I tripped into drumming as a hobby that became a side hustle that became the thing that I do for my living since, I guess about 15 or 16 years now.
Wow. Wow.
I love that. I think it's so cool, especially even hearing about all the different creative outlets that you explored so young, from playing instruments to singing, to elements of theater. And then, of course, having to balance that with academia, so to speak, of how do these
Yeah.
identities meld together, which I love that it kind of came full circle, obviously, as growing into adulthood. So what actually inspired you to found Drum for Change specifically? And maybe explain a little bit more about.
Oh, okay. So let me give you another slice of that story. So when I was working at NC State after I'd left the military, my first job there, I was working for university housing, where I had been as a student. I was a resident advisor in the dormitories, and so my job was renting out the dormitories for the summer. And so we'd have all these groups of kids and think tanks and conferences and all these things that would come in and spend their get-togethers at NC State. And one of the first groups that came in was an arts and sciences camp, and they were based out of UNCG. It was called, oh gosh, I think it was just all arts and sciences. And they brought in 300 kids, and they were doing stuff all over the campus, right? So at the end of the week, they put all the kids in the auditorium and they give the slideshow to the parents, and you have to figure out how to get all those people in that place. And so they lined up the kids on the sidewalk after breakfast on Friday morning, and out walks this guy wearing this West African djembe drum, carved out of wood and covered with animal hide. And he starts playing this drum, and these kids start marching along in perfect unison and harmony. And you've heard of things being a moving thing to witness, right? The music was moving. Well, this was literal, right? Because my toes started tapping. And then next thing I know, I am in the parade and I'm marching along with these kids. And I find that guy at the end and say, "What is that thing? Where'd you get it? I got to have one." And so that became my hobby. I took some classes, and then I wanted people to play with, because it's fine to do it on your own, but it's way more fun to do it in community. And so I started teaching a little bit, and creating partnerships around the area. I started a group that was meeting down at Lake Johnson Park. And so Raleigh Parks and Recreation were an early adopter for this thing in the area. And that turned into 6 or 7 years of programming. And people would come by and see it because it's out in the public eye. And they would say, "Hey, what is this? What are you doing? How do we get more of this? Can I come take a lesson? Or will you come to my kid's school?" And so all these offerings started coming up, right? And I thought, "Oh, this is great." And then in 2009, I got laid off. My position was downsized. And so my employer at the time said, "You can keep your job, but it's only going to be a half-time job." And I'm like, "Well, I can't live on a half-time salary. I've got to do something else." And so I decided to launch Drum for Change. And so I had
Nice.
already been doing the side hustle thing through a community organization called Raleigh Drum Circle, and they're still going strong 22 years later. And they meet down at Pullen Park in the warmer months, and they're over at Method Road Park now for the winter, and they'll reemerge around April or so. But that community group is run by friends that came along part of this journey with me. And so Drum for Change came from the need to separate free public programming from trying to earn my living.
That makes
I
sense. That makes sense. Like
Yeah.
there's several bands, as far as I'm aware, several bands in the area and music groups that it's the same thing. They're community bands. It's for fun, a great place to learn and build camaraderie and, networking, but it's free, or any money that's raised a lot of times is for charity, as opposed to, trying to make something to pay the bills.
Right.
Yeah, and I think especially for our listeners who we have a wide range of disciplines that listen to our podcast, whether musicians or theater majors or visual artists. I love hearing the similarities between, of course, Adrienne and I being visual artists, with that path of it starting as a creative side hustle in a way, with the goal of really just getting it out into the community, getting people to engage with your creative kind of like output by having these drum circles. And then during that pivotal point of being, okay, well, part-time work isn't going to cut it. So let's see if this thing that I've been doing on the side for pure enjoyment and maybe a little extra spending money can really have legs to launch the next phase of my career. So I love hearing those
Yeah.
parallels. And as you mentioned, the Raleigh Drum Circle is still going and still going strong, and actually received the 2024 Raleigh Medal of Arts Award
It's
last
true.
year.
So proud of those guys.
Yes, which
Yeah,
is so exciting. So even that keeps getting taken to the next level, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it's a whole
absolutely.
different level of commitment to your creative practice when you decide you're going to try to earn your living at it.
Hmm.
And in some regards, that sucks some of the joy out of it, because you're no longer doing it as the amateur. Amateur, the origins of that word mean for the love of it. And now you're doing it for the dollars of it too. Not because you
Hmm.
love it less, but now there's a little more pressure to go along with that.
How do you feel
Yeah,
like you
there
first
definitely is.
reacted when making that pivot? Or did you ever have hesitation with making that?
I probably never would have done it, right? I have most of my career been employed by government, but in college I worked my way through tending bar, and so I was always in the restaurant and the service industry and whatnot, and then went in the military and then worked for the university, which is state government, and so I never foresaw myself being any kind of entrepreneur or being self-employed for that matter. And so it was a huge leap for me to do that. And without being laid off, I probably wouldn't have taken that opportunity. I would just gone and in fact, my sweetie Annalise Gentili, is a coach, and so she is a visual artist as well. Uh, and so her background was theater and film and television, and she was a hair and makeup designer. And when I came home and said, "Oh, I've got to clean up my resume. I've lost my job," and she said, "Well, why? Why don't you go do the thing that you really love to do?" I'm like, "Well, who does that?" And she says, "Everyone I know. Give it a shot." And so the next 6 months was trying to figure that out. And launching the website and getting the business credentials and registering as a teaching artist and trying to turn all that stuff into a serious endeavor. But within 3 months of leaving that employment, I had booked a gig that in a week paid me 50% more than I earned in a month working for the state. A year later, I earned that
Yes.
same amount in an hour, right? And so it
Yes.
was really doable and so much more enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's definitely something to be said about at least giving it, like the joke goes, the good old college try and see
Right.
what happens. And I can almost envision that maybe perhaps if you hadn't lost your job when you did, I'm thinking a few years later with COVID happening, chances are this would have come back on the table anyways. But that
Yeah.
was, that was good timing so that when something like the pandemic hit, you were at least already kind of set up. And isn't it socially distance friendly, technically, the drum circles? They can be.
If you're outdoors, maybe, the
Maybe kind
pandemic
of.
really, really hurt the drum circle industry.
Yeah.
And many of my colleagues across the planet shut down altogether and couldn't
Mm,
work. And a few got really inventive and tried to figure out how to do things through Zoom or other
yeah.
online platforms. And the lag is really limiting when you start tying up the bandwidth with audio and video. And it was really, really difficult. Me,
So
I
when things
did a
open
mix
back
of
up.
that and then wound up doing some production work on, lesson DVDs and those kinds of things. It became school programs that our local arts council helped fund and put out into the universe. And that was great.
Okay, okay. Awesome on the pivot. That's amazing. And you already had some credentials going for you, when that rolled around. Well, something I'm curious that, you've mentioned and I kind of want to get back to for a second is how do you think your time in the Air Force or working just in the military in general influenced your, focus on leadership and community?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I was a scouter growing up. And if you know anything about scouting, it's really about service, right? And how do we take care of the people that we know and the community that we live in and those kinds of things. And that just continued to evolve throughout my career path. Going to college, you became a resident advisor. I joined a service organization, Alpha Phi Omega, the National Service Fraternity. And so that just continued on into military service. In the military, I was actually a policeman, so I was a public servant in that regard. And then coming back and working in customer service kinds of things at the university. A lot of what I did was undergraduate recruiting work, hosting camps and conferences and those kinds of things for different organizations. My last real job, I trained all the tour guides at NC State. And so helping people learn about the university and why they might want to spend some time there. So it was kind of cool that it was just this continuation of, how do I help people make life better?
Love it.
Yeah, and I feel like especially, I mean, music in general has that natural tendency to unify people together. Even in your kind of origin story, sharing that, okay, it's music inherently something that you are interacting with and participating with, even if you didn't directly choose to, right? Your foot starts tapping once you start hearing it. And I love how you're able to bring that to different communities and groups through not just your individual leadership and sense of community that you fostered with the Air Force, but also with continued music too.
Are you guys music makers?
I've tried piano as a kid, self-taught, and then as an adult, I tried ukulele. I won't show you now, but I do have shorter pinkies that don't reach the line. So that presented some interesting challenges because I
Yeah.
can't, I mean, could I adapt my pinky somehow? I mean, people do it all the time, but it did become a source of frustration for me musically. I'm more one of those like play it by ear persons as well.
Mhm.
So even trying to learn like sheet music was like reading hieroglyphics, but I will remember random songs and like the solos of the guitars and the drums and all kinds of different instruments.
Right.
Just yeah, randomly. Like I could probably like hum it and just be like, okay, I know exactly what this is. But yeah, I tried. Visual art is definitely more my jam, and
Okay.
sculpture is definitely more.
Yeah.
It works towards my strengths a little better.
Yeah. I grew up playing a handful of instruments. I feel like many people are able to do within school systems as we continue to push music importance in schools. So I played the viola and the harp. I actually really
Hmm.
liked the harp, which is kind of like a niche instrument for sixth grade. Made me very cool. But then I also played piano. So I love being able to now even be able to have that skill of being able to read music. I've slowly started to get back into piano.
Yeah.
I would definitely not proclaim myself as a musician by any means, but some single note tunes I'm learning my way through. Since
Awesome.
taking my art business full time, we've actually talked about on the podcast before. It's been a really helpful creative outlet for me of playing the piano, and I've also gotten into line dancing, which is a whole other rabbit.
Okay.
I've started competitively line dancing recently. It's very fun. We love it. But having a creative outlet that for me, I'm not intending to monetize, right? And I think that's very important for creatives when you take your business full time. Sometimes it's as you were mentioning earlier, it's like that different level of commitment to your creative artistry to where then it's okay, this does feel more like a job, which isn't inherently bad, but it does change your relationship to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I found that need, okay, I need a creative outlet that is strictly for enjoyment and fun and not
Mhm.
something that I'm trying to turn into an income stream, so to speak.
Yeah. My first drum was like a little $30 kids drum.
Love it.
Nice.
And I was tapping on that thing, and I lived in a condo at the time, and the neighbors hated me, but it made me feel so good to play that instrument. And then
Mhm.
that's just magnified when you do it in a group. So you get this new level of awareness of music as you're playing in an ensemble. And I'm
Mhm.
seeing it my niece and nephew now. They're Laszlo's 9 and Giovanna's 12, and they're doing the band thing and loving it, and just really coming to be part of the music rather than the solo music maker. And it's beautiful to see how they're getting this different understanding of how do we do this thing together, right? And for me, that's the metaphor for life, right? How do we co-create?
Yeah,
I
exactly. And I
have
think kind of on that note, like why do you feel like rhythm in music is that powerful tool for building teamwork and harmony within a community?
Well, rhythm in particular, drumming is very primal, right? It goes back to the ancestors and clicking rocks together and tapping on a log, and so that's it, inherent in humankind from the beginning. And every culture that I'm aware of has some kind of drumming in their lineage, right? And many cultures are more connected to that still to this day. And the music that I study, the music of the African diaspora, and how the music came from Africa through the North Atlantic slave trade and managed somehow to persevere in the Caribbean and those surrounding areas is the stuff that lights my fire, because
Mhm.
these things are enduring and there's something special about them that makes that stuff last through all these hundreds of years. And that's what I dig.
Ah, I absolutely
I
love
love
that.
that so much. I was gonna say, I'm like, being from the Caribbean, like I'm from Puerto Rico. I grew up with all kinds of drums being part of the music,
Yeah.
and I mean, they had the different tambourines, and there's actually preservation of different African dances. They came from Kenya, they came from Nigeria, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of Yoruba and Igbo, tribe members that made it over, not by choice, as we know. But like it was like some of the even like some of the current music being made in Puerto Rico, like it can literally tie its roots right back, to the Africans that brought it over.
Yeah.
So we've always had the whole like, barefoot dancing with the big, with the big skirts going on when they're
Right, right,
doing like the
right.
folkloric dances or the typical dances. And there's always like you can't help it. Like even in the tourist areas, when this stuff gets going, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from or what you look like. You see people like start tapping along and, just bobbing
Yeah,
their head along. And it just kind of like, growing up, we used to say it just gets in your bones and it just like,
right,
forces you to dance.
right.
And
It's
I don't
bringing
know, there's
people to
something
life.
so magical.
I love it, and I love that you're naming off some of those origins, right? So many people are disconnected from their history, and here in the United States, we're a relatively young nation. A lot of us don't have that connection. Annalise, my sweetie, is really connected to her history and her lineage. That wasn't as important in my family. So beyond the people that I knew, I couldn't tell you a whole lot about the history of my ancestors in particular. So that was kind of something missing for me. Right? There's a little longing there, a little nostalgia to tap into some other way that connects me to the history of the planet somehow.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it's like, I remember in music class, speaking of nostalgia, when they finally made the connection that rock and roll, rock in general, had African roots. To me, it was just like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I mean, just drumming in general, which is part of what rock, often, not always. We know there's a lot of different flavors out there, but like some of those roots came over from the freed slaves doing like different rhythms and mixing singing with it. And, some of that came out of there. I was just like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. At
Yeah,
least for me, I'm like, there's a tie-in of sorts.
right, right. And most
It's
people
so
wouldn't
neat.
wouldn't know it, right? Anything from the invention of the drum set to the patterns that they're playing on that, uh, there's nothing new in that, right? That's all old stuff that's come a long way to be with us.
I know, I know. And for those of you that contemporary Hispanic music, a lot of that, that's where it came from. Like if you like reggaeton, I'm watching you. A lot of those drum beats came from Africa
Yeah,
and then
I
got
don't know if I
incorporated and all mixed together in this wonderful mix with, of course, influences from other countries as well. So it's a nice, wonderful collage of sounds, if you
yeah,
will.
yeah. I don't know if I told you the last time I saw you, I got to invited to play at a Parandon, a Puerto Rican
Hmm.
holiday party. And so in this tradition, as I understand it, the pleneros, the guy that play those fancy tambourines, would come around and they party hop and they come and they sing a few songs and have a little something to drink and eat and move on to the next place. And so we got invited to do this thing. And my drum class, my conga drumming class, went and had the very best time. And so we're playing Christmas tunes, they're
Oh
sung in
yeah.
Spanish, and we're playing popular music, and none of us are Hispanic, and so we're limping along the best that we can, but having the very best time. And they gave us chichaito. Do you know that
Uh-huh.
drink? Yeah. Oh man, it was so good. It's like this licorice flavored rum. It has
Oh
anise in
yeah.
it. Oh man, that's the
Just
best.
and there's always going to be, well, not always, but often there's some sort of alcohol
Yeah, for sure. And
and
that
snacks,
goes back
lots
to
of snacks.
the social and the religious history, right? Of
Yeah.
we're appeasing the ancestors with a libation,
Oh
pouring
yeah.
out a little liquor to soothe the
Oh
spirits for
yeah.
spirits, if you will.
Yeah, and a comparison, I guess, to the States, not close, but it might give some people like a little bit of a visual. It's like, think of that idea of the holiday singers that used to go to door. Instead, they don't stay outside your door. These folks are not more interactive. They show up at your house. You open the house, and there better be like some snacks and alcohol going, and it's like singing and dancing, and it's just like it's extremely interactive. If you don't want them to come in, you better shut your lights out.
Right, right, right,
Don't.
right. And that
They're coming.
speaks to our society and the puritanical values from the original colonists, right? That have kind of shaped
Yeah.
how we behave as a society versus the ancestral origins from Africa and how they celebrate life. And that's a very different experience.
Yes, it is. And it's a lot more community oriented. So when I've talked to folks that come from other Latin cultures, if you will, and I mean Latin as in, Latin, Mediterranean Latin, the Italians, actually some Asian cultures are the same way as well. definitely all over the Caribbean, Central and South America. There's always that whole like, if they see you walking down the street, they'll be like coming over, grandma just made some food, let's and there will be some music playing them in the background, If there's no live music, there's at least something playing in the background. It's very lively, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a different type of living than the States. Not saying one's better than the other, because I also do value my privacy. Living in the States, that part's nice. Nobody's like banging at your door saying, do you have any libations and snacks, and let's turn up the music. And you're like, but I'm trying to do laundry. Um, it's definitely a give or take. But I do want to ask you, sorry, we got carried away there for a
Oh, sorry about
second.
that.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I got really excited. But I do want to ask you, so when it comes, speaking of interactive and community, when it comes to your programs, um, why do you believe that active participation is critical to the impact of the programs that you're putting together?
Ooh, okay, okay. So there's two ways to look at that, right? One is learning styles, right? You've got audio, visual, kinesthetic, right? And so people will absorb things better in different ways depending on their own processing. But I'm a big believer in embodying the learning, right? And so doing the thing. But I was a reader growing up, so I process differently. And so as I'm learning music, I'm absorbing it in one way, but I teach it another way because if I can uh, embody that music, if I can play that music, then I have a whole different level of understanding, right? Than just hearing that music or being able to talk about that music in an observer or academic kind of sense, right? And then like I look at your backdrops on your screens and I see these beautiful colors and the vibrancy that's there. And color is vibration, sound is vibration. And so if I can help people create that sound and bring that vibrancy into the room, into their beings, right? Because that sound is resonating in your atoms. It's a whole different way of experiencing life.
I love that. I think especially that energy. It's one of those things that people can't always explain, but to your point, you just need to experience it and people know what you're talking about. Which I feel like goes to that kind of like the timeless wisdom and the timeless experience, as we were talking about earlier, that primal need to make music. So how do you feel like that timeless wisdom resonates with modern art audiences in addition to that energy? What do you feel
Yeah.
like?
Oh, that's really good. And the programs that I do are don't tell anyone, but largely the same, regardless of the age of the audience, right? We're going through this process where I'm teaching you, I'm tricking you into liking it, I'm empowering you to do it, and then I'm showing you how to collaborate to do it on your own, so that my job becomes obsolete, and then you become a self-regulating music making body, right? As a group. And that kind of thing is what I think we need more of, and that goes back to those old world learnings. And I studied in graduate school applied philosophy, and so it
Nice.
was, I went to school at a place that taught acupuncture. And so it was a lot of traditional Chinese medicine, Buddhist thought that was infused in that. That aligned with my upbringing in scouting, and my scoutmaster was a Native American guy. And so those kinds of things, and the folk wisdom from my grandparents who were, farmers and growing their own food, and they were of that generation. So all of these things that we kind of disconnect from as a modern society, but they're in us, right? They're in our DNA, and I think they want to be awakened somehow. And so whether I'm working with kids in school, and so like I'm going in a couple of weeks over to Cary Elementary School and working with their kindergartners. And those kids have been smushed all day long. Stand in line, don't touch the walls, be quiet. You're getting shushed for the next 12, 15 years. At that point. And so the idea that they can bang on things and make all the noise that they want is tremendous. And it's true with the grown-ups that have come through that process too. And so I was doing some team building for Glaxo, for GSK, a few months back, and saw that there too. People want to have that play. They want to have that creative self-expression. And can we make that relevant in some way that taps into our corporate culture as well as our ancestral culture, right? And shape the world. I've usually got it on some of my background stuff. It'll say this quote that I borrowed from Gandhi, right? And Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see." Right. And so Drum for Change says, beat the change you wish to see.
Love
Right.
it.
So how do we, through music making, start creating the experiences and the connections with others that we really want to live in the world?
Oh, I love that so much. I'm like that resonates a lot with, like, for example, I like to teach children and adults art as well. And I mean, that's essentially what I'm doing as well. To me, I have this belief, it may sound naive, but let's go for it. I do have this belief that I don't want to call it like an antidote, but almost an antidote to this more screen-oriented, highly regulated, highly almost like a, mm, what's the word I'm looking for? A generic type world that we're kind of rolling towards where everything's just like more and more standardized. It's like through the expression of creativity, we can kind of turn some of that around
Yeah.
and be able to say like there's a place for standard and that's fine. That's how things function a lot of times. But there's also a place for play and exploration and who cares? Just do it anyways and make a mess and you know tap tap along the pencil to your favorite song while you scribble on a piece of paper. Like, who cares, and have your barefoot toes in the grass, while you sketch a plant. Okay, maybe stay away from the ants though, but like, you know what I mean? It's just like that idea of like you can have it both ways, but it's important to remember that there's both ways. It's not just the one standard kind of generic thing that keeps getting pushed through. There's the
Yeah.
creative side too, and you need both for a more fulfilling life,
Right. We
essentially.
need those social agreements to make society functional. But
Mm-hmm.
we forget that we can shape those social agreements too, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it becomes okay to wear the flip-flops to dinner, or taking
Yes.
off your shoes under the table. Those kinds of things would be unheard of in the polite Southern society that I grew up in. Uh,
Yeah.
but we can rethink some of that. Oh, you can't wear jeans to work. Well, why not?
What?
Right. Says
Thank you.
who?
Thank
There's
you.
this collective voice that we all kind of agreed upon, but people also are all questioning, but they don't want to be the one to voice that they're questioning it. Yeah. And to your point, Adriana, that really reminds me of last year when I did a community engagement mural with an elementary school in downtown Raleigh, Hunter Elementary, which was an amazing program to where I collaborated with their art elective.
Nice.
Over the course of 6 weeks, I went in and like me and the students designed the mural, selected the colors. They actually got a hands-on paint the wall, which I think was really touching back to that kind of agreed upon breaking of the norms of how the students interact with the space, right? Like you
Right.
could honestly even see them being hesitant of, okay, the first day we did a doodle grid on the wall where we said like, okay, you can paint anything you want, just get used to painting on the wall. And a lot of them were like really hesitant, being like, are you sure we're not going to get in trouble for this? Like,
Right.
I've been told for the past 4 years at this school, keep your hands off the wall. And now you tell me to paint on the wall? Like,
Forever paints.
yeah. And then even doing like the color blocking and it being kind of like a paint by numbers scene to where there were a couple instances where either a stressed out teacher would be walking down the hallway just saying like, man, it looks so nice just to be able to relax and paint this wall. And I said, take
Hmm.
2 minutes, pick up a brushstroke and just to see them be like, wow, this is very enjoyable, kind of like reconnecting to that primitive energy. Or in a more extreme case, having a student that was clearly overwhelmed in a classroom environment, having an emotional stressing moment at the time where they would be in the hallway with a teacher. And I'd be like, well, if they're throwing a temper tantrum or crying
Yeah.
or overwhelmed, I would be like, come on over to the wall. And one little boy in particular, like naturally, without even being like prompted to, he started syncing his breath with his brushstrokes. He was painting like a red section, and he went from like hysterical crying to totally calm in a matter of like 2 minutes. And I'm like, this should be a constant in schools. I feel like this would bring so much help to these stressful, overstimulating, very regulated environments, which to your point is definitely in corporate and just adult community spaces as well. Obviously, it has its challenges too from a facilitating standpoint, but they're just so beneficial.
Yeah, you're onto something. And the North Carolina Arts Council is doing this, and other friends are doing this through private enterprise, the idea of arts integration.
Yeah,
And how do we use arts to teach the other things so that learning the other stuff is so much more enjoyable?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Greg, what are some of the challenges that you have faced as a facilitator and how did you overcome them?
Oh, yeah, well, there's a couple, right? Because I'm a Caucasian guy teaching musical traditions from other places, right? And so you get a little pushback on that because people have been marginalized since the beginning. And so there's certainly some sensitivity to be mindful of as you do those things, right? And then as a facilitator, the thing that I do is pretty weird to most people, right? Asking you to sit in a circle and look at folks instead of sit in an auditorium and look at a stage or a screen, to make music rather than buy an MP3 or stream it on Pandora these days, are all weird things, and not everybody digs that. And so it's easy to forget that some people would rather be in their shell than come out into the brave new world of being a creative in some way. And so you sometimes get that stuff. And so you get all the stereotypes that show up, right? You get the class clown, you get there's no way in hell I'm going to do that thing. I think about some of the programs that I've done over the years. I think my toughest audiences, one was a group of attorneys, and they had a serious problem, right? They took everything really, really seriously. And so they weren't able to go there with these activities. Another group I had was a bunch of mortgage brokers during the housing bust. And so this group I worked with, their vice president had taken them all out drinking the night before. And so
Uh-oh.
I got them on a Friday morning at 8 a.m., asking them to bang on stuff and make noise, and they were all hungover,
Oh no.
right? And so it was misery for everybody involved. But I know that the techniques that I use and the approach that I bring are useful and they're creative and they're fun and you crack open other stuff and it works, but it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And right. And so those of us who are, we call ourselves rhythmic evangelists that are singing the praises of this thing. Have to understand that we love it and we know that most people are going to love it and benefit from it in some way, but that's not true of everyone. And that's okay.
Yeah. Maybe
I
that
love
needs to
that
be
so
a
much.
contract moving forward of please do not take team out drinking the night before our event.
Yeah. And so I've learned, right, in my like intake questionnaire kind of thing, what else is happening during this offsite, or what are the kids studying in school that we might be able to draw upon or avoid? Where into the grander scheme of things does this thing that I do fit?
Love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, there's so many parallels because I'm like in hosting community events, we get the equivalent. We get but I can only draw a stick figure. And it's like, oh, like we're just splashing paint around, or I can't do this, I'm gonna mess it up, or I'm not a visual artist. I don't have the talent that you have. And it's like I like to always bring them the conversation. And I think this would work for, musical, activities as well. I always like to remind people that making art is like making food. The first time you did it when you were a kid and you tried to imitate your parents' recipe, it was probably a disaster. It probably looked like a disaster and it probably
Right.
tasted like a disaster. But you don't just swear off cooking the rest of your life because you messed up that one time. Like it takes time for you to learn what's your learning style? Do you learn better with grandma next to you, guiding you step by step? Are you more of a watch it on YouTube kind of person or a Pinterest tutorial? Like or a you do it over and over again until it tastes palatable. Like everybody's different, but anyway, so I had to make the note because I'm like, it's just to me, it's hilarious. I'm like, we're hearing some of the same reservations in a slightly different way for visual versus auditory, but it's the same stuff. It's the same level of resistance with I am either not good enough or I'm not qualified to do so, or
Yeah.
I'm shy and I don't really want to embarrass myself in front of others. But at the end of the day, I love that we're all doing the same thing. We're kind of poking people, going, just try it. Just try it. It's okay. It's okay to mess up. Just try it.
Yeah, don't let the fact that you've never done this stop you. And don't let the fact
No.
that you think you aren't good at this keep you from getting better. It's a practice, right?
Yeah.
We practice being creative. It's the practice of art. It's the practice of music. And on the one
It's an
hand, that's
art practice.
practicing the thing, right? Using the instrument over and over again, but it's also getting our head on straight to do this thing.
So true. And I feel like kind of taking that to the next level for some of our listeners who may be thinking about facilitating an event or a workshop for a wide-ranging audience, similar to the events that you host. You touched on it a little bit earlier, and that they don't change too much from audience to audience. But I was curious, have your lessons evolved over the years, or like how do you weave together past lessons or future lessons for those multi-generational audiences?
Mm. Multi-generational things are interesting, right? I do that a lot for like company picnics or church programs and those kinds of things. And a lot of times I'm learning to leverage what people bring to the room. And that's true in any drum circle, right? How people show up and it's going to be different every time. And so if I've got mixed ages, then it's getting the kids to empower the older folks rather than the other way around. Because the older folks are going to tell the kids how to do it. But the kids are just going to go for it, right? Third grade is my favorite because they haven't become skeptical yet. And they've developed some motor skills to be able to do things with a bit more refinement. And they'll just go for it, right?
Yes.
And so if I can get the kids to model that for the adults, rather than let the adults squish the kids
Hmm.
with their understanding of how things are supposed to be done, then some magic can happen.
Yeah, same middle schoolers to me. I'm so sorry. If I go to schools and do other programs, I'm not trying to be mean. Middle schoolers are the best.
Oh, right on. Okay.
Yeah, because it's like they can already follow directions, right? And are still excited. They're not jaded yet. Let's just call it that, right? When they're too
Yeah.
little, they're still processing everything you're trying to tell them. But I feel like middle school, it's like they've already had some life experience. They can follow instructions, but they're also still creatively, like they're still creative sponges. And with minimal direction, they can just take it off. Like they can just they just run with it, and it's just amazing to kind of see the stuff that they come up with, and they don't necessarily have to reference a phone or the internet to know what to do next. They're just like,
Mhm.
I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. So they're still like, I don't know, I feel like their brains are still like just so excited and so flexible and so, I don't know, they're just like still, they're sparking. Not saying the teenagers don't get us wrong, we were all
Yeah,
teenagers
I
at
know.
one
I think
point,
when
but
puberty comes
there's a
into
different
play, it all
expectation.
goes out the window, and
That's when the aliens take us away until we're about, 26, and then we get returned back to our bodies. Anyway, sorry about that. So, Greg, what advice would you give to other artists or facilitators who perhaps want to create some kind of transformative experience for their audience? Anything about logistics or planning, any hot tips for folks that are just trying to do
oh,
something like this?
a few things. My first thing in any artistic endeavor, any endeavor really, is get a mentor, right? Get somebody that knows the different aspects of what you're doing. I had a drumming mentor, I had a business mentor, and I had a philosophy mentor, and they all brought different things to what I was trying to create, right? Transformative, you don't get to decide that, right? You can set up the experience and hope that someone is going to have some big aha from that, but you don't get to say so, right? And so learning how to create those opportunities where they discover the thing rather than you handing the big nugget of truth or wisdom or whatever it is, that makes the difference. And that's where the facilitative skills come into play. I think it's not the musical skills or the artistic skills. It's, can I create that space for a conversation to process what's happened, or to process what I'm feeling or what I've learned, and to give that context in some way. And that's a big challenge in the drum circle world, is how do we make what we do relevant to anyone else? Right. We had fun and we banged on stuff, and we played some music from some old places, and we made up some improv, but so what? Right. And then, how do you bring that full circle so that people have some understanding of the possibilities that might show up through that experience rather than the actual experience?
Yeah, and then when they come back years later and say there was this one workshop or this advice you gave me and this is kind of like the result it had, I feel like that's when it's the most mind-blowing of all, honestly.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
What's that old quote? I can't remember off the top of my head who said it, but they'll never remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yes, love
Yeah,
it.
Ugh, so good. Yeah, and I think that's so true. I think especially if creatives are type A or trying to overplan lessons or workshops, trying to kind of hit the nail on the head with a lesson. I love that reminder of that perspective shift of just seeing that, okay, like just need to provide that space to keep the conversation going where that transformation can happen. It's so great.
yeah. I think we as teachers, as facilitators, have to be kind of open-minded that the result that we were going for may not be the one that shows up in the room. And yet your audience is telling you something with whatever feedback they bring to you. And so that's a good one. And kids are great for that too. If they're zoning out and doing something different, and they aren't paying attention, that's about you. It's not about them.
Hmm.
Right? You haven't engaged them well for whatever reason.
Ugh, so, so true. Man, I love all this advice. Now, real quick, up next, we're going to talk about how you define success. But first, we're going to take a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist resources.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there, but what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold so that you don't have to waste time going down those endless rabbit holes.
We created a library of PDF resources with bonus videos that cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, and artist mindset, several templates, and more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartist.com/shop to level up your creative career today.
Welcome back, everybody. So, a question we like to ask all of our guests is, how do you define success as an art professional?
Ooh, that's a good question. For me, it's about lifestyle, right? In part, it's revenue. I want to be able to earn my living doing this thing. But there's a great quote, and I'm not here who said it. It may be old and it may be really old, but the idea is that the master in the art of living doesn't distinguish between his work and his play, and neither does anyone who watches them. Right. And so that's kind of how I've tried to reshape my life. I spent 20 something years working for the man, doing the thing that everybody expected. And now I get to do the thing that I want. And so I can go paddleboarding in the middle of the day, or have a coffee with a friend at 3 in the afternoon, and shape my life the way I want to. And so, earning the dollars that let me have the leisure to do that, and working with the clients that bring me joy, and turning away the ones that don't align with the values that I want to propagate into the universe. That's success for me.
Absolutely
Yes.
amazing. I think especially I love that distinction between not just your experience as a creative or art professional and that seamless element of, okay, being able to grab coffee and also play music. Those are all part of your creative art life, but also from the viewer to where I think the expression of living a creative life as other people witness it, they see that as part of the artwork in itself too. So I love
Yeah.
that
I'm
distinction. I'm definitely gonna be looking up that quote. Put that
I'm
on my
headed
wall for sure.
I'm headed to Creative Mornings. You guys ever go to the Creative Mornings events?
Yes, I love them. They're
Yeah,
wonderful.
there's one coming up this Friday, and I'm always intrigued to go because it's a thing, a gathering, a networking happening, a lecture series intended for creatives, right? And then you go and you see people that you instantly know are creatives, and you see other folks that you go, oh, really?
Hmm.
Because that person is still trapped inside their thing. And
Mhm.
they're sporting the suit or whatever, and there's still so much pent up creativity that hasn't come out of that person yet, that you really see. Are you walking the walk as well as talking the talk? Oh, I'm a creative web designer, but you don't look like a creative web designer, so maybe I want to work with that other guy who's really flying his freak flag over there.
I love it. Yeah. We actually
Yes.
interviewed Joel, who's the part of Creative Mornings in Raleigh.
The
Uh,
host, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so a reminder to all of our listeners to go back and listen to his episode talking about Creative Mornings in general from a national and international organization level, and to find the one in your city because they are amazing. Now, Greg, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Mm. Oh, okay. So I mentioned earlier the value of mentors, right? And one of my mentors gave me a piece of advice, and this one's really good. And then my accountant gave me another piece of advice, and maybe I'll share both of those, right? And my business mentor said, "Is this a hobby? If not, you need to get serious about what you're doing, right? And figure out how to maximize your monetary value with what you're doing in the marketplace." And my accountant says, when you look at your revenue stream, and I see this little thing where a few dollars came in, is that really worth your effort? Right? Should you
Mhm.
set that aside because it's not actually moving you forward in the directions that you might want to be going? Or are you just doing that because you love it? And that's okay. But know that it's not really part of what you're doing for your living because it's not bringing a lot of return for the amount of effort that you're putting into it.
Ugh, I think that's so important, especially that pivot point of is this a hobby or is this a business? Which I think is a really hard question for a lot of artists to kind of make a statement about. But I love the advice both of them gave you, where it's really just looking at the numbers and then looking at the time that you're putting into each of those income streams and evaluating,
It's
which
not
is,
like the old days where artists had patrons, right? And they gave you money and they gave you a place to live and they funded your projects. And you don't see that anymore. So you got to do it differently.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. There's so many creatives that think that getting paid equates to selling out. And I always like to be that smarty pants in the room to remind them of like, those Renaissance artists we're still talking about that everybody still loves? They worked for pay. Like they painted commissions. Like it's okay as long
Yeah.
as it's something that's in alignment with what you want to do and you're passionate about. Why shouldn't you get paid for it? You should. Movie stars get paid. Why shouldn't visual artists get paid? Why shouldn't musicians get paid? Why shouldn't performance artists get paid? Like, there's all these categories. So yeah, you should get paid. But
When
I
you think
do
of your
like
art as your work, right? It's the work.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
People get paid for
yeah,
working. You don't want to
yeah.
get rid of that stereotype of the starving artist. We don't want to see that
No,
anymore.
nobody likes that. Yeah, no, we need to throw that out the window forever. But I also like that second advice that you received because there's also this idea of, if you're doing something, even if it's not financially rewarding yet, either because it's still starting out or you haven't put enough energy into it yet, or maybe it's just not viable. But one of the most important questions is to ask, does this bring me closer to my goals or farther from my goals?
Mm.
And if it still brings you closer to your goals, and perhaps it's you did a pro bono or, for cheap or even for free type of activity, but it's still in alignment and getting you closer to your goal, there's still value in that, even though on paper it may be it didn't, it was just petty change, petty cash.
Yeah.
But as long as it's in alignment, we definitely, I think all three of us are on the same camp of like, if it's not in alignment and if it doesn't bring you closer to your goal and you're not really getting paid, just back burner it and probably get rid of it later. Like
Right.
don't go gung ho on this thing if
And
it's
you make a
not.
point there, right? The idea that, with my background in service, tithing is important to me. Uh,
Hmm.
and I would rather give it away than you make me feel cheap because you're only paying me a pittance for the amount of work that I'm doing to deliver something. And then if I'm going to give it away, I want to give it away to people that need it most and can afford it least. And
Hmm.
that's not the
Hmm.
nonprofit that's making, big bank on pharma or whatever, whatever it may be. Those organizations have dollars. They'll say they're a nonprofit and they can't pay you, uh, but maybe that's not really true.
Yeah. Do your homework, people. Do your homework. There's websites for rating nonprofits too, so y'all can Google it up
Oh
if you
yeah.
want to see where your dollars are actually going. But yeah, no, for sure. Speaking of dollars, perfect tie-in. This was not on purpose. Greg, if somebody randomly hands you $100 right now, what would you splurge on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Ooh, am I stuck at $100, or can I like ship
Yes.
in some extra? Uh,
For North Carolinians, yes, we're stuck at 100. Only New Yorkers and Californians can
yeah,
bump that up.
because
Everybody else is stuck with 100.
yeah, I dig tech toys, and so like right now I could really use a new audio interface to do some of my work, but I can't
Ooh.
get it for $100. And so like I dabble with some looping music and those kinds of things, and this new keyboard just came out, but I can't get it for $100.
Ooh. Okay.
So let's see, what have I got going on that I could invest $100 in? Oh, let's see. I need some new gear because my audiences are growing, and that's a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
And so $100 could go toward buying some new equipment so I can do some larger programs.
Yeah. Okay.
Exciting.
That's
With the back
perfect.
burner of technology equipment also. Definitely understand that. We try to keep it at $100 just because for some that may feel like a little bit of a stretch, and for others it's kind of showing that, all right, even with simple key improvements, you can
Ooh,
really
I
to.
got one. I
Okay.
just spent $100. And I spent $100 on a subscription to an app called Mile IQ. Do you know this app?
No, tell us about
Mm-mm.
So you put it in your phone and then it tracks where you go. And so at the end of the day, you look and go, okay, here's one leg of where I drove, and here's another leg of where I drove, and here's another leg of drove. And this one was personal because I went to the grocery store. And so you swipe one way. And here I went to art space. So that's work. And so I swiped the other way. Right. And
Ah.
that's business. And oh, here I went to a networking event. So that's business. Right. Oh, and here I just drove home. So that doesn't really count. Right.
Yeah.
And so you can easily track your mileage, and it tells you real time how much you've saved, right, on your tax return, right? So that trip to the grocery store is worth $6.52 because I drove that many miles, kind of thing. And so if you're new to the business world and you're starting to look at this accounting stuff,
Yeah.
mileage is a big deal, right? So figure
Hmm.
out where you're going and then get really open-minded about the trips that you're making. If you're, taking something to the post office, then that's work related. And if you're going networking, that's work related. And so if I'm going to
Hmm.
creative mornings, I am hanging with my creative community, and that's professional development, and that's work
Yes, it
related.
is. Yep. Just like that coffee with that colleague where you talk shop. That
Yeah.
counts. And so does the coffee.
Now it's a very short commute from my house to my backyard studio to be here with you today. But if I were driving it, I would be claiming it. Let me tell you.
There you go. Oh my goodness. Well,
Perfect.
I don't know about you, Adriana, but I'm literally going to be downloading that app as soon as we end this conversation because recording this right around prep for tax time, that'll be very helpful. So I'm definitely going to be doing that, probably not for this year, but for next tax season. So thank
Well,
you.
get started. Get started. It's not too late, right?
Yeah.
Because next year, when you're trying to figure out where you went,
Yep.
you're going to be regretting it.
I'll be doing it now and prep for next tax season. So that's perfect. Well, Greg, this was so much fun. Real quick, what exciting projects do you have coming up that our listeners should know about?
Ooh, let's see. This coming Friday, I'm working with some new friends that I met through a women's empowerment group. It's a mother-daughter team that run a business here in town called Elevated Energy Healing. And we're going to do a drumming play shop in their space. And they do sound baths and Reiki attunements and all those fun, new agey kinds of things. And it's a beautiful space, and they're lovely people. And so we're going to have this will be all gender, but a drumming play shop. The idea of how do we play with this tool and do this in a way that becomes uplifting, that has a wellness benefit to it. So that one will be big fun. That one's coming up on Friday. And then what else is cool? I'm working with some memory care folks that same afternoon. That's the same day as Creative Morning. So all that's going on. So I hope to see folks there. And then I've got a school program, and then I'm headed to a convention with all of my colleagues. So the Drum Circle Facilitators Guild is my professional association. I was the former president and the former executive director of this group of people that do what I do all over the planet. And so we get together once a year, and this year it's going to be down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And I don't know, 80 or 100 of us will come together and have a symposium and share all the coolest things. And so you want to see me after that, because that's when I get really fired up and I come back with a lot of new stuff. And it's a great time.
Oh, we understand the
Yeah.
whole coming fired up after a conference. We have a video that
Right.
comes out either one or two episodes right before this one, and that's half of the conversation is us like being all fired up, almost being highly caffeinated in the best way.
Yeah.
Um,
And Jackie,
after
you
a
and I ran into
conference.
each other at a conference not too long ago, right? Last fall,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah, in August, the Artist Thrive conference in Winston-Salem. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was wonderful. It was so fun.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this idea in mythology that talks about brushing up against the tree of life, right? It strips away all the non-essential stuff, and what's left is you. And so when we go out and we brush up against the other creatives, some of that rubs off, right? And it takes away the excess trappings and helps us be more of who we're really meant to be. And I really value that kind of encounter. So thanks for coming to that happening.
Yeah, it was so fun. Yeah, and in our episode, we talk about kind of similar too, just like the power of getting out of your day-to-day routine, getting into a new space, a new headspace, a new physical space. And yeah, it sounds like all of these events that you have going on encourage people to do this, just that. So, unfortunately, by the time this is airing, the handful of events that you mentioned on January 31st are gonna have already passed. But future creative mornings, and different events that you are hosting. Where can our listeners contact you and stay in touch after they listen to this episode to hear about those upcoming events that you are hosting?
Sure, sure. I'm very active on Facebook. Drum for Change has its own page, and personally, that's more of my creative life and the things that I do for fun. But I'm love to hang with people there too. My website, drumforchange.com, that's DRUMFOR change.com, tells you a bit more about me. I don't put a lot of things there. Most of my work is for hire. So I'm working with groups that bring me in to work with particular audiences. But if you have audiences, I'd love to come to your company picnic, to your kid's school. I run summer camps for the town of Cary. There's all kinds of places where we can connect out and about in the world.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to link all of those things and the show notes that come out with this episode. Greg, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, what a gift. I so much value this time together. It's been so much fun, and to learn a bit more about how people are going about their creative worlds is always a treat. I get a lot out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad the three of us have crossed paths with each other many, many a time. So this was due. So I'm glad we did this. So in the
Yeah.
meantime, for our listeners, if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artist on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.